Okay, hello everyone. If you have ever thought to yourself, litigation looks super cool on TV, but what other super cool practice areas are there for me as a law student and a future lawyer? Then you are in the right place tonight. Welcome to Summer Associate Hub's live introduction to Transactional Practices virtual showcase. My name is Paula Heller from Lateral Hub, and I'm very proud to have you all here. Today's session features some really great firms. I'm sure you've heard of them. Proskauer, Wilson Sonsini, and Lowenstein, and the attorney panelists that you see here on your Zoom screen tonight. Before we jump in, a little bit about what Summer Associate Hub is about. Summer Associate Hub is a free content and resource hub for law students embarking on their 1L and 2L summer recruiting season, if you will, their process. I'm a former big law recruiting professional, and I know how wild it is not only to be a 1L, but both also a 2L and a 3L in law school and navigating the wild, wild west that is being a student looking for your job and your future. Our platform, summerassociatehub.com, has blog posts, podcast episodes, short video tutorials, conversations with attorneys, exercises, and a ton of other resources for you not only to learn more about how to be a successful 1L and 2L, but also about things like we're talking about tonight, different practice areas, what's a fit for you, what firms are like, and at the most basic level, what it's like to even work at Big Law. So, for those of you who might also want to learn about litigation, we don't like to discriminate here. Tomorrow we'll be doing this all again, focusing on litigation practice area. And once we get going, my team and I will drop the link to register for that session as well. FYI, the best way to stay in touch with us here at Summer Associate Hub is to sign up for our newsletter. And I have great news on that front. If you registered for tonight's program, you're already registered for our newsletter. We went ahead and did that for you. So you are good to go on that front. I do want to share a little bit about how tonight is going to go so you can anticipate what's going to happen. Tonight looks like this. We are going to have brief introductions from our attorney panelists that we have joining us tonight. We are then going to have a panel of questions. We are going to hear from them about what their day-to-day looks like, how they landed in their transactional practice area of choice, and what makes each firm stand out. If you have questions specific to tonight's program, please drop them in the Q&A. That's where my team and I will be keeping an eye at. Hopefully we have time for live questions. If we don't, I really encourage you to stay and jump into the breakout rooms with each one of the firms after tonight's panel. It's a really great way to engage with our attorneys. They'll also have members of their recruiting team and possibly other attorneys from their firm joining them. It's a really great way just to get some smaller group time, ask those questions that we might not have covered live, and network with the attorneys, the firms, and also your fellow law school colleagues. One other note on our programming before we jump in, you're still able to register for our virtual recruiting programs that are coming up later this month on January 30th. Also keep an eye on the Q&A. My team and I will drop a link in the chat tonight. You can register tonight, but you do want to keep an eye on whatever email inbox you register with because the deadlines for those are coming up quickly. Portals for applications open tomorrow, and it's a pretty quick turnaround. So we want to make sure that you have enough time to register and check all those details out. But like I said, let's keep the Q&A questions that we have in here and the questions when you're joining those breakout rooms that I know you'll be joining specifically to transactional practice areas that we're talking about tonight. One more housekeeping note. I know you might be joining us from your phone or from your tablet. In order to join the breakout rooms later that I love talking about so much, you will have to be on most likely a desktop. You don't want to be using that app because you might not have access to the breakout room. So just want to put that out there in case you need to switch over in between the session before we go into the breakout rooms. Okay, so on that note, it looks like everything's working from my end, which looks great. We are going to jump into introductions, and what we will do is I ask my attorney panelists, I'll go from what looks like on my screen. So Jack, I'm going to ask that you kick it off with introducing yourself and your practice area and briefly why you chose to work in your practice area. Thank you
All
for
right. All right. I will try to keep it brief. No.
yeah.
So my name is Jack Hamilton. I am an M&A partner in the New York office of Wilson Sonsini. And what M&A means, so the way I explain it, including to my children, is I help companies buy and sell other companies. I think that's pretty hopefully succinct. Wilson Sonsini in particular focuses on life science and tech companies. I guess I should say tech first. We do more tech than life science. So we represent companies, doing AI. Obviously, that's a huge thing. Autonomous driving, software, social media, sort of anything in the tech space that you can think of. That's what we do. And then obviously a lot with life sciences. The firm does, all sorts of general corporate stuff as well, and also litigation. But I specifically just do M&A. And how I chose to work in my practice area. So I originally was in a general corporate group at another law firm, and I loved that. As with most general corporate groups, they do mostly M&A. That's kind of where the transactions lie. And I fell in love with doing tech M&A. I know it's weird to say you fall in love with your work. I really do. I love it. Hopefully that will come across. And I think part of that is it's fast paced. There's a lot of things happening all the time. And I really like working with clients on, there's sort of confines of the law and, the way that we typically do things, but they're in M&A in particular, especially private company M&A, you can come up with a lot of creative solutions. And especially with tech companies who are sort of doing things that maybe, in their own world are not the things that have been done before. They like the idea of creative solutions. So I really enjoy, working with tech companies on M&A.
Awesome. Thank you. Julia, you want to head to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Julia Sanabria. I'm a partner in the New York office of Lowenstein. I'm in the real estate group. Our real estate group does really generalist real estate work. We do acquisition disposition, finance, joint venture work. My practice centers on commercial leasing. I started very much as a generalist and over time realized that leasing is really what I love to do. So now my practice is almost exclusively commercial leasing, but I work quite a bit with my colleagues who do other things here. What I love about it is when you do a commercial lease, you're starting a long-term relationship. So it's interesting. It's things that I can see, especially being in New York. It's nice to walk by buildings and know that I worked on them. It feels very tangible to me. But most importantly, even though the negotiations can be tough, obviously you want to get the best that you can for your client. You have two people who are really coming together and are intending to have a very positive relationship, and you're at the beginning of it. The other thing I really like about it is I was interested in it because there's a lot of drafting and I love writing. And I really love the idea that my documents will live for 10, 15, 20 years, as long as the relationship lasts. So you have to be really careful and make sure that your drafting is as precise as it can be. And as far as how I picked it, I honestly had no idea what any lawyers did when I was in law school. I didn't have any lawyers in my family. I didn't know anything about it other than what you see on TV, which is obviously not commercial leasing. So when I was a summer associate, not at Lowenstein, I tried every single practice group I could. I spoke to every lawyer I could. And once I narrowed down, I wanted to do transactions. I stopped focusing on the litigation. I continued trying. And for me, I was an English major with a strong focus on creative writing. I didn't have a strong economic background. I didn't know a lot about finance. So it just made the most sense to me. I could walk down the street and see a building and understand that I was helping someone rent space in that building. And it just kind of made it all a little more crystallized for me.
Thank you, Julia. Simon, you're up.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me here. Thank you all for joining. My name is Szeman. I am a partner in Proskauer's Boston office in the private credit group, which is part of its global finance practice in the corporate department. I've been at Proskauer my entire career, so I'm homegrown, as they say. And perhaps the most ironic thing about my practice area is the fact that I really don't like being in debt. So when I graduated from law school, one of my main goals was, to start at a firm and be able to pay off my law school debt as quickly as possible, which I did manage to do in a few years. But it is a bit ironic that, in fact, I am now a debt lawyer. But I guess it's kind of different when it's not me being in debt, but I'm helping companies who are looking to finance transactions. But what I really do like about what I do is it's truly at the intersection of law and business. So I actually came into it without a finance background. Most of the attorneys in my group didn't study finance or work in finance, but it's all very learnable. And frankly, it's helpful to have sort of a baseline understanding of accounting and corporate finance, but we're not the ones crunching the numbers or, doing the spreadsheets and running models. We're on the drafting and negotiating side. So it's really neat to be in a practice that is so transactional in nature, and to see our clients who are lenders typically come to the table with, a long list of things that they want to get in a deal. And then through the course of the deal, our lender clients who are across from the borrowers, have to whittle down that list into what are their must-haves, what are their nice-to-haves, and what they can compromise on. And so most of our clients, like I said, are lenders, but we actually don't represent banks. We represent what are called alternative lenders. So that's business development companies, private debt funds, insurance companies. Basically, it's these pools of money that are being invested on the debt side, in the form of making loans. So our clients make loans to companies that are looking to do acquisitions or looking to refinance existing loans that they have. And so, that type of deal work was very intriguing to me. I find it very satisfying to close a deal. And honestly, when I was a summer associate, how I chose the group was just from talking to the attorneys, could sense that there was this energy or momentum coming from the group, just emanating from the group. And I said to myself, I want to get in on that. I want to be a part of it. I want to see where this group goes. And from when I started until now, the group has at least doubled, if not tripled in size, which is really neat to see, and have been, part of the group during that time. And so it has been a really exciting time to get into private credit, and it really continues to be an exciting time to be in that industry.
Thank you so much to all of you. So, for our attendees, our law students, that was only the introduction, and you can tell how excited each one of our attorneys is to even speak broadly about the work that we're doing. So, I'm excited to jump into the questions to get even more in depth with them. Before I do, there's one thing I forgot, and I'm sorry about that. There's swag, there's giveaways. And who doesn't love getting swag and giveaways? So our team dropped that information into the chat. We do have a chat up and running for you for some details that I mentioned. It's not in the Q&A. Sorry about that. So keep an eye on that. You can click the link to join for a chance to win the swag. Here is the deal. To join the prize raffle, you can click on that link. You then have to be present when we call your name live later. So not that you were going to leave before the breakout rooms, but that's the deal for that. So thank you for that. Little housekeeping. Let's jump right back in. So Jack, I think we're going to start back with you. What are the typical matters that you'd work on, or are you working on day to day as an M&A attorney?
Yeah, so sort of as I mentioned, one of the things I really love about M&A, in particular at Wilson, is that things change so quickly. And so you're working on a lot of deals at once, right? So anywhere from, 4 to, when we're really busy, 10 or more deals at any kind of given stage. And then you've got deals that, they closed. And so they're all at different stages. We do big, small, public, private deals, right? And so they require different types of work. So no 2 days are really the same, right? So I woke up this morning and I sort of knew what I was going to do. And I went into the office, and then, I got an email and something changed, and I got on a phone call and I got, some new thoughts on something, right? And so I guess the way I was thinking about this question is that I would sort of break it down into stages and then kind of give thoughts on where, junior associates in particular, kind of what they do at those stages. So at the very earliest stage, right, we're working with companies at the term sheet stage. And they're kind of coming together either on the we're representing a buy side client, or a sell side client gets a term sheet, and they're trying to agree on the basic economic terms of a transaction, right? And so before they expend a bunch of resources, get their internal and external legal counsel involved, and maybe other advisors as well, they say, okay, I want to pay $100 million, and if that's a buy side, and the seller says, no, I want $200 million. maybe they don't want to expend all those resources, right? That doesn't maybe make a lot of sense, right? So it's good to get alignment on certain kind of key economic terms. Sometimes a term sheet is just that, it's just economics. Sometimes, oftentimes, it's a little more than that, and sometimes it's really detailed. And you get into like, we're going to have standard reps. This is the indemnity package, or there's no indemnity, right? They kind of vary. At the earliest stage, I'll say juniors are not as involved, and it's just kind of the nature of that drafting has to be done often by someone more senior. It's a lot of times it's maybe just a partner, a senior associate, and a client. But then as we move on, right, let's say the term sheet gets signed, and then you kind of start the diligence process, and that's where junior associates really kind of do start to dig in. And so the juniors are often responsible for, looking at corporate records, customer and vendor contracts, making sure, either on the buy or sell side, right, you're kind of doing the diligence depending on what side you're on, but making sure that in our case, because we do so many tech deals, making sure that the company owns the IP, right, so that it's all been properly assigned by the employees or contractors, or fixing that if necessary. And then, making sure that people are just broadly kind of in compliance with laws, right? And so whether that's privacy laws or they've correctly filed their taxes. So there's all sort of diligence process. And then kind of at the same time, we're starting to draft transaction documents. So that is what I spend a lot of my time doing. So drafting the transaction documents, and I'll just say here, I think it's probably true for everyone in transactional practices that even though you're kind of, deals change all the time and you're doing a lot of custom stuff for very sophisticated clients, you never, at least in my experience, you never start with like a blank piece of paper, right? So you're always starting, and I think this is important, you're always starting with some sort of a precedent. And so one of the things that when you start drafting is you say, okay, is there a precedent that you would like me to start with? Or is there a good precedent that I want to, I think we should use this generally, or I think we should use this provision from some other deal, right? So those are things that you're kind of thinking about. And then, so again, you're kind of drafting the transaction documents. And then I'm kind of focusing on what junior associates do. So then as you kind of move towards signing those transaction documents, you often generally have a checklist. And one of the big things that sounds, maybe easy on paper, but it's not, is making sure that all of those documents get signed properly, right? So if they're signed by, for instance, stockholders, who a lot of times it's not just like Jack Hamilton, it's like Jack Hamilton LLC, or better yet, some other LLC, and then who signs on behalf of that LLC, right? And so you've got to make sure that on both sides that everyone is signing correctly. And oftentimes, if you're on the buy side, you only have a couple signature pages. On the sell side, you might have hundreds of stockholder signature pages that you have to go out and get, right? So this can become an entire work stream in and of itself. And so I think that there's a variety of things there. And again, I'm happy to, in the breakout room, kind of answer more questions. But yeah, I hope that gives a little bit of a taste of kind of what we do.
Yeah. It does. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And now this is going to be the same question to you, Julia. What does the day look like for you as a real estate attorney?
So for me, as I said, my practice is pretty specialized. So it is leasing one way or the other. Sometimes we're representing landlords, sometimes we're representing the tenant. There are obviously different considerations in each, although I found it's really great to do both sides, because the more you represent a landlord, the more you get to see what other tenant attorneys comment on the documents. And the other way too, the more you're a tenant, you get a better sense of what the market is for your landlord clients. So one of the things that I've really come to enjoy about my practice is it really, for the most part, and this is really different from when I used to work on more financings and development deals and things like that, is it really is one document that's governing the whole relationship. There are a few documents that we won't get into now that are sort of like ancillary documents, but the vast majority of everything that can come up is in the lease or what's often attached to a lease, which is a work letter. So it's pretty much what you would expect. It's just governing the terms of the relationship, who's responsible for what, who pays for what else, sort of how things work, how risk is allocated over the course of the term. And then, much like Jack said, we never start with a blank page. So if it's for a landlord client, I'll pull up the precedent form for that client and then consult the LOI, talk to the client about what the LOI really means. Sometimes they can be a little bit ambiguous. and then draft the document based on the LOI and what else I know the landlord or tenant is comfortable giving or getting, depending. And as far as junior associates, actually kind of an interesting practice to be a junior in, because you really have to start drafting right away. Because, when I was a junior associate, as I said, I had a more general practice. So a lot of what I did was diligence, which I think is actually, although I may have dreaded at the time, really important to learn what actually matters to your client. So in real estate diligence, you might be looking at like a title commitment or a survey to understand what is encumbering the property, if there are things like easements that go through the property that might cause a problem if you're trying to build or something like that. So in that side of our practice, and the more general side, the junior associates would do a lot of diligence. It really teaches you what your clients are looking for when they're assessing a property. So even though it can be a little bit of drudgery at times, I think it's actually really informative. But if you're working on a leasing transaction, as I said, it's really just one document. So a junior associate who's working with me, it would probably just be the two of us. So you would probably take the first pass at drafting. If it's a particularly complicated lease, you might need more help than otherwise. The nice thing about my practice is we do all types of leases. So you might be working on, a 6th-floor lease for a very fancy law firm client that has a lot of demands and a lot of options that they have with respect to the space, things like expansions, renewals, rights to make an offer on a space before anyone else does. So that takes a little bit more time. But we also will do things like licenses for a retail store. So there's an opportunity as a junior associate to take lead on something like that. And while you may not get into the super complicated drafting, it teaches you the fundamentals. So you would be working directly with a partner. And if you're representing the landlord, you do the first draft based on the LOI. If you're representing the tenant, can be a little trickier in the sense that you're getting someone else's documents, so you're not as familiar with it. But there, usually first step is to go through, obviously make sure it matches the terms of the deal, but also, look for things that are of particular importance to your client, things that might make it a riskier transaction for your client, look for ways that you can save money for the client. So at that point, usually we put together an issues list and then spend a lot of time kind of talking to the client about what they need. But it's, again, just the one document. So you kind of trade it back and forth. And something that I really love to do with juniors is have them actually read those form documents and then sit down with them and talk to them about what the different provisions mean. As you'll see, once you start doing transactional documents, a lot of times there are provisions, boilerplate provisions, that if the other side doesn't comment on as a junior associate, you might just skip over and think it's not important. They are actually quite important. So it's important to take the time to read those and really understand what it looks like. And then just in terms of what we're leasing, it can be anything from high-end office. We do shopping center leases, we do hospitals, studios, things like that. So it really kind of changes with the times, what's most popular at the moment. Right now, after a very long time of this not being true, it's really office leasing has come back sort of with a vengeance in the last 6 months. So I would say most of my desk at this point is filled with office leases.
Thank you. And Simone, last but not least, private credit, corporate finance. What's your day look like?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, we mostly represent lenders who make loans to different companies, and the loans can range in terms of size from 20 or 30 billion dollars up to $1 billion or more. And our clients have made loans, and I've worked on deals to all really companies in all different industries. So, I've worked on a deal for a trampoline park financing. I've worked on a deal where we financed a chain of car washes. I've worked on deals for HVAC companies, which is heating and air conditioning. I've done a deal for an online women's clothing company that I personally have bought some clothes from as well to help the business. So there's really a wide range of companies that our clients finance. And I think what might be helpful at this stage is to sort of explain, maybe this will jump a little bit into the next question or be a nice segue into the next question, but the difference between what Jack does on the M&A side and what I do on the finance side, because the two kind of work side by side a lot of the time. Basically, in an M&A transaction, the private equity sponsor that's looking to buy a company will have to pay, obviously, a purchase price for the company, right? And to finance the purchase and to pay the purchase price, there will be a component of it that's put in as equity. And so the equity piece will be investors who are putting money in and getting shares back in the company. So they will become owners of the company. The other piece of what goes into the purchase price will be financed by debt. So if you think about private equity sponsors and their investors, if they don't have to pay the entire purchase price using their own money, then they're going to look for a lender that they can partner with who's going to make a loan to finance the rest of the purchase price. And so that's how the two types of transactions kind of work alongside each other. And if you think about the capital structure of a company, debt always comes out before equity. And what that means is the debt holders are going to get paid back in a downside scenario before the equity holders do. So the sort of return that they get is going to be higher because they're sort of taking on more risk. Whereas the equity holders, there's unlimited upside. So for debt holders, they get interest payments, they get fees, they get what are called principal payments sort of regularly. And so that's how debt differs from equity. But if the company does really well, the equity holders get sort of all of the remaining upside. So it's just two different types of investments that can be made as part of an M&A transaction. And so a lot of the day-to-day in terms of process and documents that we have in private credit actually are quite similar to what Jack described, and they have it as what they have in M&A. So, at the beginning of a deal, there's probably going to be a term sheet or a commitment letter. That might also be when our juniors conduct their diligence and try to get an understanding of what the company does. Once you sign up a commitment letter or term sheet, then you go into what we call sort of long form documentation. And on the debt side, the main document will be your credit agreement. So that sort of governs the loan and what the company can do while the loan is outstanding. So they'll make certain reps, there'll be certain covenants as to what the company can and cannot do while the loan is outstanding. And then there'll also be a number of collateral documents. So most of our loans are secured by all assets of the company. And so the collateral documents will be what sort of governs the security package that the lenders have. So if the borrower doesn't perform well, or if they're not able to pay back the loan, that's when the lenders can, exercise rights and remedies, and we would want to make sure that those are detailed in the documents. And that's also when they, would have the option to sort of take some of the collateral or take over the company. So as a junior associate, what I think is really neat is the ability for you all to quarterback the deal. So it's going to take years to really understand the substance of all the documents, but there are sort of the ancillary documents that you start out with from the beginning that you draft and review and comment on. And then your job as a junior associate is to really manage the transaction in terms of knowing the status of where all the documents are. So you're keeping track of the closing checklist, you're running checklist calls. It's so important to be able to be that quarterback and be able to sort of keep all the trains running on time and on their proper tracks, especially on deals where there's a lot of different work streams going at the same time. And so through that process of, running the deal from a process standpoint, you start to really learn, what's in the documents as well. And the neat thing about deals is that you're basically you're one of maybe 3 or 4 people on the deal. So everyone plays a very critical role in making sure that the deal closes smoothly and efficiently and on time. So the junior associate plays such a critical role on our deals and really gets a lot of responsibility up front. So there's so many opportunities to learn and, interact with the clients, be leading calls, be, negotiating with opposing counsel, really from the time that you're first year or second year. So that's a really neat aspect of our practice.
Can I also just jump in? Yeah, so I think it's really helpful to hear about how the sort of corporate finance and M&A stuff overlaps. I think one thing to mention on the M&A side, and this one of the next questions is about kind of how to differentiate these things. So it will come up, but I think it's useful in thinking about how I spend a day to day. I spend a lot of time, obviously, with my deal team in particular, but I spend a ton of time, with our specialist groups, right? So on the tax team, we're thinking about at the early stage, we're talking about structuring transactions. Should it be a merger? Should it be a share purchase? How should it be taxed? Obviously, for buyers, it'd be better a lot of times if it was an asset deal. That's not great for sellers. There's, kind of a meeting of the minds of how we think about things. And I spend a ton of time with our employment and benefits teams to think about how employees are going to be treated in a transaction, how the outstanding employee equity is going to be treated in the transaction. And so that's one of the things that I don't think that corporate finance spends a ton of time on, and I don't think real estate and other groups. I think that is kind of specific to an M&A, sometimes a more general like venture practice, but that's one specific thing about M&A. So when I joined the firm actually at Wilson in 2021, and it was during COVID, everything was virtual. I spent a lot of time trying to get to know my M&A colleagues, but after the first year, it was really interesting. I was sort of doing this reflecting exercise, and I realized I actually knew so many of the specialists, like all of the partners, all of the associates in the specialist groups, and I knew the people I'd worked with on the M&A team, but I didn't know everybody because you frankly, you often do spend so much time, especially when you're getting into like really nitty-gritty details, and it allows you, as Szeman said, to kind of quarterback deals. You're doing a lot of, trying to translate, especially as you get more senior, to the some of those really nuanced tax or benefits issues. Sometimes you'll be able to get, the client on the call with those specialists. That's obviously the ideal aspect. But sometimes you just have to know enough, and you're, 280G is not going to mean anything to you right now when I say it, but it's a specific nuanced area of the tax code. And so trying to explain, very high level, like 10-second overview to the client, hey, this is really important. We're going to talk about it for right now. And then we're going to like give you this email, and we're going to like give you a bunch of information requests, right? And then you can get on the phone with the specialist. So you learn a ton from that aspect. But again, you just spend a ton of time talking to and learning from your specialists. So I should have mentioned that earlier, but it felt like a good kind of landing point.
Yeah, this is great. It's almost like you guys had the questions before. But this is great. Like let's stay here. So for my attorneys who are our panelists, you're in it, right? You're a mid to senior, you're a partner, you're meeting other people. Jack, like you said, you're meeting the specialist, but take it a couple of steps back for me. And let's talk about, okay, so our law students know that they want to go into a transactional practice. They know, like they've heard from you, that learning and mentorship is important. They're getting that from all of the firms that are here today. How are they figuring out what practice to focus in on? Like, how are they figuring out, and what are some of the differences between that you would consider major differences between the transactional practices? And everyone can jump in here. And then we'll get to the enjoy. But what are some of the differences? How do they figure that out? What's your advice for figuring that out?
Yeah, so it's frankly really hard. And I'll say I majored in government and women's studies, and I had no idea that I was going to do M&A. And I didn't know, frankly, until my 2L year that I wanted to do corporate work. So I think this is I totally sympathize that this is really difficult to learn early on. And so I think firms are trying to work with folks and give, again, like we're kind of doing stuff like this to help give people an idea. I think talking to people and coming to stuff like this is really useful. I think trying to read as much as you can. So I think one thing I was thinking about is the Wall Street Journal did a really interesting sort of deep dive during the Elon Musk Twitter trial, and I think it allowed people to understand M&A from a perspective of, sort of more common like things that legal aspects that we would see all the time, but somebody actually wrote them in a way that like my parents, for instance, could understand, and they have no legal background, right? And so that it actually allowed me to talk to my parents for the first time about M&A, which is useful. I think, again, M&A gets a rep in particular for being always on and working a lot and like having sort of very high highs and sort of lower lows. I think it's a really high energy practice. It's why I like it. I talk really fast. I want to focus on 20 different things and then have the deal be over, and then, kind of do a different thing. That's not true for everyone in M&A. I just want to be clear that if you don't like immediately fall in love with the high energy and like you're not the most outgoing, person, that doesn't mean you're not going to like M&A. But I do think that those kinds of people do fairly well in M&A. So that's one consideration. Yeah, and again, I do think that the ability to communicate. So Julia mentioned really liking to write, right? I think some M&A folks like to write. I think I did not want to do any sort of real legal writing. I'm very happy to do emails. So I think if you don't love writing, M&A might be for you. You're going to draft and you're going to do a lot of very precise things, but it's not, coming up with your own. It's not as maybe as creative. Right? I don't know that we have any creative writers in our current M&A group. Maybe secretly.
Now you'll be thinking about it.
I'll be asking around.
That's right. What about for finance, for real estate? How did you differentiate what the differences were for the transactional practice you landed on?
I mean, who doesn't dream about becoming a debt finance lawyer, right?
Right.
I certainly didn't, actually. I had no idea what debt finance was when I started at Proskauer. As a summer associate, I just tried to be as open-minded as possible and to take assignments from as many different groups as I could. So I knew I wanted to go into corporate. I took all the corporate assignments that came my way, really tried to diversify the groups that I worked with to get to know both the attorneys in the group and also what their work actually consisted of. So I think during the summer is a great time if you find yourself at a firm trying to decide, what group to go into to really learn about the groups. And one thing that my group does every summer with summer associates is that we have a summer associate on each deal that we're working on, shadowing the deal. So the summer associates copied on emails. They are doing the junior assignments alongside the junior associate on the deal. And so the junior associates not only mentoring them, but really teaching them how to contribute to the deal as the junior. And that we found that that's a great way for summer associates to really get a sense of, what it's like to be part of a deal team. And also to see a deal from start to finish and to see, what each part of the deal involves, particularly on the junior end. I would say what sets our group or my practice apart that I really enjoy is once we close a deal, that's really sort of the beginning of the relationship between our clients, the borrower, and the law firms that worked on the deal. So when a deal first closes, that's when the loan goes in place, but the loan's going to be outstanding for 5 to 7 or 8 years. So throughout that time, the company can do more acquisitions, or they can, struggle a bit financially, and we'll have to put our heads together and think about what to do in that situation. Or if the economy isn't doing as well, or, during COVID, or now with all these tariffs, if the company is not doing as well, our client has to think about how they can work with the borrower to maybe amend the documents and sort of figure out, what will still work for them and give them some runway to improve financial performance. So it's really the start of the longer term relationship. And I find that to be really neat to be able to work with our clients on the front end side and close the deals, but also on the back end side if they find themselves, in restructuring or even heading towards bankruptcy. So it can be a really broad practice in that way. And I think that having worked on some restructurings and bankruptcies can be really informative to sort of helping you understand what to focus on the front end side. And I would say in our group, you also get the opportunity to work with specialists across the firm, probably a lesser degree than on an M&A transaction. But through my career, I've definitely found the ability to, interact with tax, healthcare, labor, ERISA, environmental, it really depends on the nature of the company's business. But, specialists really work with us on basically every deal that we work on. And, make sure that our documents reflect any sort of specific reps or covenants that are needed from the lender's perspective, again, given the nature of the company's business. So I think that aspect is really neat to be able to work with and meet attorneys all across the firm. And at the end of the day, a finance practice typically takes a lighter touch on diligence. So there's definitely less sort of soft review from the ground up type of diligence. We rely a lot on the M&A side. So in an M&A transaction, there's a lot of diligence done. Typically, there's a memo that's prepared, and our lender clients, their interests are aligned with the buyers in a transaction. So oftentimes we can kind of rely on the memo, or at least start with the memo that's produced on the M&A side. And that way we're not sort of doing, a full diligence review if the M&A team has already done that. So I would say if you like sort of thinking a bit more about big picture and how to structure a financing transaction and understanding sort of how to protect lenders' rights and remedies. And also, at the end of the day, a lot of what our clients do is really based on relationships. And so they have relationships with the private equity sponsors that they're kind of teaming up with in these transactions. And there's sort of a lot of trust and that's put into the relationships that they build with the sponsors that they're working with. And so it's a really sort of collaborative practice at the end of the day, because both sides ultimately want to resolve all the open points so that the deal actually closes and, doesn't die because there's a handful of points that they can't reach an agreement on. So seeing that process through is really neat. As I said at the beginning, seeing each side whittle down their list to, what are their must-haves, what are their nice-to-haves, what points can they compromise or give on so that the deal can actually close and, both sides will win if the deal actually closes.
Yeah, I would say in terms of choosing and differentiating, pretty similar to what's already been shared. I mean, it really is just talking to the people who do it. When I was a summer associate, I spoke to many, many attorneys about what they did day to day. I asked them things like, okay, you sat down at your desk, what's the first thing you do? Because I really, truly didn't understand. And I think it's hard. I remember going to like practice group presentations as a summer, which were really helpful for sort of the overarching premise of a practice group. But I would still walk away thinking, okay, but when I sit down at my desk, what am I actually going to be doing? And when you do that, when you talk to different attorneys, I would really recommend talking to attorneys at all different levels, because what you're doing as a first year is not necessarily what you'll be doing as a third year or a fifth year partner and so on. So I think just like getting as detailed as you can with people about what they like about the practice, like what we're doing here. I find when you ask people to describe what they enjoy, suddenly they start sharing more details. They can really kind of walk you through what it is they like. It might make it easier for you to identify what you don't like. If someone says, it's high energy and you're not, maybe you still try it, but at least you have that as kind of a data point that sort of by process of elimination, what doesn't fit your personality. Because I think with any of these practice groups, I think you'll find the people who are most successful in them are the people who actually enjoy doing it. It's going to be a lot of your life and a lot of your day. So I think trying to get as clear a picture of what your actual day will look like as is really the best thing you can do as a summer associate or as a law student. I've had students reach out to me from schools who I haven't met before that just want to ask me questions about my practice. And I think it's something that I never thought to do as a student, but connecting with individual attorneys and learning what their life is like and what they do and don't like about their practice, I think is really helpful. I also think, and I say this as someone who has a bit of a niche practice within a broader practice, really understanding that that's a possibility. When I was a junior associate, I joined a real estate group based on the work I had done as a summer and the fact that I really, really liked the people and all of that. I think was ultimately a good reason to choose it. What I didn't understand is that the work that I did as a summer was not the lion's share of what the group did. It actually did mostly CMBS lending, which was not exactly for me. I know a lot of people who love it, and I think it's a great practice area. But once I realized that was my true day-to-day and not the real estate work that I had done as a summer, which was not by any means a bait and switch. It just was what was available at that moment. That was what I got staffed on. It was what I loved. And then I got to the firm and realized, that is real estate law, but that's not the real estate law that's really being practiced here. So really kind of not just focusing on what you've been assigned, but really trying to understand generally what the group at whatever firm you end up spending your summer with does and what kind of the ratio is of each type of work that's done, how easy it is to get involved with different practice areas. I guess I should say sub-practice areas within a practice group. Because even when you talk about real estate, for example, like I said before, there's leasing, there's joint venture work, there's borrower side finance, there's lender side finance, there's acquisition and development work. And there are some practices that do all of those things. There are some practices that will only do one of those things. So I think, it's important to understand generally what a type of practice is, but I think it's really important to understand what the practice where you work is and what they're specifically doing there. So I would really encourage everyone to try things. I also think, law school, as you're probably all learning, is very litigation leaning. So it's really hard to actually understand. I feel like your main opportunity is by interacting with others, like this webinar. I wish there had been something like this when I was a law student and I kind of went in blind. But again, I would probably spend the most time talking to the junior associates. I think they can give you a real picture of what your day will look like. They can give you something. As I got more senior, I learned every year you sort of forget what you didn't know when you started. An example I always like to give of that is, I'll sometimes get feedback from a mid-level about a junior associate, and they'll say, oh, well, they didn't even know what an SNDA was. And they can't believe that the junior associate didn't know that. And they'll have to remind that mid-level that they were a junior associate under me, and they also didn't know what that was. And that's totally normal because you don't learn it in law school. So I think it's really, as I said, like talking to people who are going to be doing specifically what you're doing, ideally at the firm in which you're doing it. Once you're already a summer associate, it can just look, in my experience, having practiced at a few different firms, it can look really different firm to firm, not just practice group to practice group. And then as far as what I love about, I've talked about some of it already. One of the things that really stands out, particularly on the landlord side of my practice, is I really kind of become part of their team at the client. So I'm talking to them every day because every time there's a lease that's going to happen in one of their buildings, they're going to call me to do that lease. And so I develop a really kind of close and long-term relationship with my clients that is very fulfilling and exciting to kind of see what they're doing next. It kind of helps you get ahead of trends. So I'll see, this client happens to be sending me a lot of deals related to restaurants. So I kind of get a bit of a pulse of what's going on in the market, which I just find interesting. And I think you can see from everyone who's been talking here, finding it interesting is probably the most important thing, regardless of which practice group you end up selecting. But having those kind of relationships where I kind of learn what that client cares about, right? Because I may have two landlord clients. One may think some issue is the most important issue in the world. And then another client will tell me, oh, we don't care about that at all. It's never come up and we're not worried about it. So it's sort of developing a bespoke relationship with people over time and learning about the industry that you're working with. So for me, even though I'm doing leasing, I might be doing it for a restaurant. So suddenly I'm learning what kind of ventilation system you need to have, or, how you mitigate odors if it's causing a problem for the office above. And then in the same day, I might be doing a lease for a law firm and understanding what matters most to them. So you also are kind of getting a little bit of a picture of what that industry does. And then on my retail side of the practice, it's just kind of fun to see, new restaurants coming to the city and things like that. The documents are no more interesting by any means, but it is kind of fun and exciting to know, if a popular restaurant or something like that is popping up in a new neighborhood. I always love that part of it.
Thank you. And this is a good place to jump into why your firms. So before, I'm going to be mindful of everyone's time before we get you guys into the breakout rooms. Each of my panelists, 30 seconds or less. Why should someone choose your firm? And our special little rule here at Lateral Summer Associate Hub is that you can't say the people, because we all know it's the people. You found your fit. But 30 seconds or less, why your firm? Julia, we'll go right back to you.
Sure. So something I really like about my firm that other firms do as well, but I think we do a really good job about it, is understanding that you guys don't know what practice group you want to do, and you don't know what it means to be in that practice group. So as part of our summer program, you can try every single practice group that you want to. I encourage students to literally try everyone, even if just as a means to get to know the people across the firm. Even if you're not interested in that, I think it's important to develop relationships. But something that is a little bit different is once you finish your summer, we actually continue that sort of open program for the first 2 years of your practice. So when you finish your summer at Lowenstein, you select whether you want to be a litigator or transactional. Most people figure that out, even if they haven't figured out the subgroups. But then for your first 2 years, once you're in one of those two kind of general umbrellas, you still are getting assignments from as many or as few sub-practice groups as you want. So if you're a corporate associate, you could be doing M&A, you could be trying debt finance, you could try real estate. And then we found that kind of over the course of that 2 years, people sort of naturally self-select into what makes the most sense for them. But for me as a junior associate, I'm actually kind of glad that it worked out the way it did, because I found real estate that fit for me elsewhere. But if I had stayed at that firm, I could have realized, hey, maybe securitization lending isn't for me, but I do still want to do transactional. Maybe I'll try M&A, maybe I'll try, the finance group or whatever it is. So I think we take a really long time to work with our incoming associates to figure out what makes the most sense for them.
Awesome. Thank you. Szeman, 30 seconds or less. Why Proskauer?
Sure. So one of the things that when I was a junior associate, a lot of the senior associates said to me was, I never thought I would stay in big law for this long. And I think that's really telling in and of itself as to what it's like to work at Proskauer. I would say that the culture here is one where people take their work seriously. We work on high profile matters with sophisticated clients who obviously expect a certain level of attention and service and, quality work from us. But at the end of the day, we don't take ourselves too seriously. And what that really gets at is, I think it's important to be able to see the forest from the trees. And this is a place where we really emphasize the importance of learning about and understanding how your contribution, particularly as a junior associate, for example, is part of a larger team, and understanding how, what you're doing or the task that you've been assigned or, what you're working on that day fits into the bigger picture, is something that we spend a lot of time making sure our junior associates are aware of. And also, this is a firm that really invests in their associates. In the past year, I made partner here, and I also became a mom. So I had my first child, and I was put up for partner in the same year, which is super exciting. And I feel really incredibly fortunate that Proskauer has just been so supportive of both my professional goals and my personal goals.
Thank you so much. Jack, Wilson
Well,
Sonsini.
congrats to Szeman. That's awesome.
No, congrats.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so Wilson Sonsini is I think the preeminent firm for tech and life science clients. Right. So we work on some of the most interesting transactions for this wide variety of clients that are, quite literally changing the world. And I know we're not supposed to say it's about the people. Hopefully you'll let this slide. I think for us it's about the people, right? Because it's about the clients. So we just have such incredible clients that are doing such cool things, right? Like I said, they're changing the world. Like they are on the next frontier of everything. When you think about what technology is, it's just the new thing. And so I think we have this phenomenal client base, really awesome group of lawyers and staff that come together, and we get to execute on awesome transactions, whether that's M&A or it's a securities transaction or it's frankly incorporating companies, right? So I didn't talk a lot about what Wilson does generally, but we take companies from the very earliest stages, we incorporate them, and we take them through the life cycle of raising money, and then hopefully doing an M&A transaction or going public, and then maybe we keep them as a public company client. And then just sort of one off, I think we continue to have a public facing diversity committee, which in the year 2026 is very important to me in particular. And I'll end with this. We get to do it wearing jeans and sneakers. So if you like that, you can come hang out with us. It's one of my favorite things.
What great notes to end on. I want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you, our attorneys, so much. And thank you to everyone who joined tonight to learn from each of them. We love continuing to spend time with you in the new year, and we know how precious everyone's time is. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am going to hit stop on our record before Don't Leave Us Yet.